Today we're going to learn a little bit about Thai forest monks and meditation. To begin, let's dive into the history of Buddhism in Thailand. Theravada Buddhism was introduced to Thailand by Sri Lankan monks of the forest-dwelling tradition. During the Sukhothai dynasty, one Sri Lankan monk named Sumana was largely responsible for the spread of Buddhism among the Thai people. Sumana was ordained in Burma as part of the Udam Baragiri forest-dwelling order, and in 1369, Sumana and his followers were invited to Chiang Mai to visit King Koena of Thailand. Sumana brought with him a Buddha relic and the Tipitaka canon, otherwise known as the twin symbols of sacred learning. King Koena later enshrined these symbols at Wat Suan Do. This temple became the center of Sumana's forest order. Shortly after, in 1411, a different Sri Lankan variety of forest-dwelling monks arrived in Chiang Mai. This order criticized Sumana's forest order for accepting money and owning rice fields. They also opened a new monastery called Wat Ba Dang, or the Monastery of the Red Forest. It is important to keep in mind that both Sri Lankan orders were very involved in Thai politics, as the Thais had just assumed power over several turbulent ethnic minorities and attempted spreading Buddhism as a means to ease political tension. Both orders often collaborated with ruling powers in order to portray religion and kingship as interdependent themes. During this time, forest monks held a central office in the Sangha, which is a collection of Buddhist religious officials in the government. It wasn't until the Sangha Act of 1902 that the forest monk sector's administrative recognition was greatly lost, as the government deemed temple-dwelling monks more appropriate and stable religious leaders. Compared to the sedentary temple-dwelling monks, forest monks, who were called Prapa in Thai, were required to be active in order to support their monasteries. They built their own huts, called kuti, raised cattle, carved boats, and tended gardens. This defied the expectation from the Sangha in Bangkok, as the government claimed the monk was not supposed to sweat. Instead, they should receive gifts and donations of money and services so that they can spend more time studying. Forest monks were thus severely criticized by the government for their manual labor, which caused the forest monks to lose financial support from local villagers. Forest monks enjoyed other activities besides meditation, such as a form of chess called makrok, drum playing called seunglang, kickball or takraw, and participation in Buddhist holiday festivals. Among these holidays was boat racing, where monks would gather in one boat and race females in another boat. This was to represent the contrary principles of male and female, and to ensure the prosperity of crops. Forest monks also participated in the New Year festival called Songkran, which commoners usually celebrate by throwing water at relatives in a massive community water fight. At court, where the highest concern was order, however, people would respectfully sprinkle water on monks and elders. Among the forest monks, they were nowhere near as reserved, where novice monks eagerly interacted with the laywomen. It did not matter whether the monks threw water to the laywomen first or the women initiated it. Once it started, there were no holds barred. The monks' robes, along with their requisites and the kutis, were all soaked. The women would chase the monk if he retreated. Sometimes they caught only his robes. If they caught a monk, he could be tied to a post in the hut. In the midst of this chasing, sometimes the women's clothes fell off. The monks always lost the games or gave in because they were outnumbered by the women. The lay women really played to win. After the game was over, a lay leader would escort the women bearing gifts of flowers, incense, to ask the monks forgiveness. This has always been the rule. According to Sangha, the contact between novice monks and laywomen during Songkran was inappropriate and contributed to the case that forest monk tradition was no longer the model Buddhist tradition for the Thai people. Another reason for the forest tradition's loss of standing in the Sangha was simply the amount of space forest monks required. When the Sangha officials first traveled to visit and inspect wats around Thailand, 80% of Thailand was forest. As Thailand began clearing land for infrastructure and crops, the power of the Thai forest monks disappeared along with the forests. Perhaps the most important figure of the Thai forest tradition is Phra Ajahn Mon. Ajahn Mon was born in 1870 as the oldest of 9 children. At the age of 22, he became ordained as a novice monk and began wandering with his teacher named Ajahn Sao. Realizing Ajahn Sao could not satisfy his meditative desires, Ajahn Mun departed on his own in search of another teacher. Ajahn Mun lived a very secluded life, preferring to live alone and move constantly as a homeless seeker. He used walking as a form of meditation and believed it to be an excellent antidote to laziness and indulgence. Ajahn Mun dedicated himself to strict observance of ascetic practices, including wearing rag robes, going out for alms food except on days he decided to fast, eating only food put into his alms bowl, eating 1 meal a day, possessing only 3 robes, and dwelling in forest areas under trees, valleys, or within caves. Through strict meditation, Ajahn Mun developed a way of thinking involving the mental recitation of the meditation word Buddho. Before meditation, Ajahn Mun would repeat a phrase 3 times that went something like this: Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. In English, this means, think of the virtues of the Buddha, the foremost teacher of the world, released from suffering and defilement of every sort, always serene and secure. Following this brief introductory phrase, Ajahn Mun would meditate on the word Buddho while focusing attention on his own body rather than the external objects around him. He preferred to use sitting meditation to reach a condition called the one-pointedness of mind, which became a technique he would later teach to his disciples. Ajahn Mun is described in his biography written by his disciple Ajahn Ta as possessing 2 poles, the rationalist pole and the tantric pole. The rationalist pole was represented by the term purist virtuoso, who was dedicated to practicing meditation, contemplating philosophical truths, and preaching Dhamma, or the teaching of the Buddha. The tantric pole was represented as a mental state of tranquility, compassion, and loving kindness. The marriage of these qualities represents the ideal arahant, or one who has attained ultimate knowledge and ascendance to nirvana. In modern-day Thailand, the forest tradition has nearly become extinct. To some extent, Buddhism as a philosophical way of thought has also nearly become extinct, as the modern Thai Buddhist only uses Buddhism for its holidays and moral code. Buddhism has lost its grip on Thailand's educational system, with several larger Buddhist universities closing in recent years. The influence of the Western world is largely to blame for the sudden split between the Western, culturally Buddhist Thais and the traditional, philosophically Buddhist Thais. Although Western influence has not helped Buddhism in Thailand in the long run, it is entirely thanks to foreigners that some aspects of the forest tradition remain. Under the guidance of Ajahn Ta, foreigners interested in the philosophical implications of the forest tradition made up a significant number of forest dwellers at Wat Pa Nanathat, or the International Forest Monastery. Here, the morning chants are conducted in both Pali, a language similar to Sanskrit, and English. There is even a Thai forest monastery in England. While Western influence has contributed significantly to the survival of the forest tradition, the forest monks lack the authority they carried centuries ago. The revival of Thai forest Buddhism is central to the purification of Thai Buddhism in general. Thai Buddhism must use the Thai forest tradition as a philosophical example in order to add depth to the practices of Buddhist Thais.